All right, everybody, welcome to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We're here on Wednesday afternoon, April 19th. We are going to be hearing introductions and brief walkthroughs of several of the charter bills that we have before us. So we're starting with H506, I believe. And these are all Burlington charters. So we have Representative Mulvaney Stanek here. So do you want to tee up the first of these for us?
Absolutely. So for your record, I'm Representative Emma Mulvaney Stanek. I represent Chittenden 17, which is a portion of Burlington. And I know you missed me and our Burlington charter, so I came back for more. I did poll all of my Burlington colleagues to say who would like to do one of these, and they all said, thank you so much. The kid who was always that lab partner who got the job done. So here we are. So these are all four of them are pretty straightforward charters, and I hope that I can help just give you a little flavor of the why and then pass over technical questions to our very capable city staff who are on Zoom and or legislative counsel on technical pieces. So let me start with H506. So this one is very long because the city of Burlington, long in terms of length, not in concept, because the city of Burlington's charter requires a detailed explanation of our city, ward, and district lines whenever we do redistricting. So, and then there's a pop quiz about knowing exactly where in Burlington these lines will get redrawn. It literally goes down to extreme detail about where the redraws happen when the population changes within census blocks. So that's what this charter is. Of course, the last census required us to move things around in Burlington. We grew, even on the state representative level, we added a whole seat. So we had a lot of population change and therefore needed to change our city, ward, and district configuration. So next year, I spoke to the charter change chair, Councilor Gene Bergman, and he said that, just for future reference, the city is considering perhaps changing this process so we don't have to necessarily have this high level of detail and come every 10 years to do this whole charter change system and make it a little more efficient where the city council could be empowered to change lines and the voters don't have to change the charter every single time. Because again, Burlington is likely always going to grow and need to move our lines, but stay tuned for that. And then just a note on this one before I tell you the vote count. So this will change some configurations in parts of the city, including my neck of the woods in the Old North End. And so these lines are going to require changes for the election workers, both our city staff, but also the folks who actually work the polls to implement. So this is a sort of an urgency for the city to be able to have this charter go through, as well as a couple of the other ones I'll mention, because we're going to have to make sure people are prepared. We have to make sure that we know who might have a vacancy because they're no longer eligible to be the ward clerk because the line moved and they are on the wrong street and now they're in a different ward, as well as just preparing voters around education about where these lines change. So we also have a big election year coming up in March 2024 for mayor. And so there's a lot of things we need to get in place around voter checklists and other details to be prepared. So I'll speak to the importance of that with the other charters. But that is in a nutshell H506. The total vote count on this item was 9,757 votes. 7,076 people voted yes, which is 72.5% of the vote. And 2,681 voted no, which is 27.5%. And I will share all of these with your clerk so you can have those counts on your record. But that is the count on this particular charter.
Great. Thank you. Seems fairly straightforward. I know that when we did our new ward maps, we already had in our charter in the city of St. Albans just the ability to adopt it by ordinance with the local legislative body. So I'm taking it that it's the preference of the city of Burlington to adopt this and then look at perhaps giving that permissive authority in the future.
Yes, because for now we really need to make sure these lines are official, so then we can adapt our next election cycle to be a part of these new lines. But yes, that's the hope, as I understand it.
Any other questions for Representative Mulvaney Stanek? And I believe Ms. Tuttle, that you were here on this one in particular. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good afternoon to the representatives, and thank you to Representative Mulvaney Stanek for giving that introduction. I think she covered most of what I had planned to share with you. So I am happy to defer to the committee if there are any specific technical questions that you might have about the process of preparing this redistricting plan.
And for the record, you're the director of the Office of City Planning.
That's correct. Sorry. Yes, I'm the director of the Office of City Planning, and I'm here because the planners and analysts in our office were the lead on supporting the mapping and data analysis that was needed to prepare this plan.
And the detail in this particular charter, we'll bring up legislative council in just a moment, is right down to the specific longitude and latitude measurements. I'm assuming that your office has gone through those with a fine-tooth comb and made sure that they accurately reflect the boundaries that you're trying to achieve.
That's correct. As the council arrived at a final map that we put before the voters for town meeting day this year, our office actually used geographic information systems mapping software to derive those coordinates to describe the boundaries.
All right. If there aren't any questions yet, I'll invite Mr. Anderson to come and just give us a sense of what we've got on the page here. Thank you very much.
Sure. Good afternoon, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. In H506, this is the first of the four Burlington Charter amendments you'll be taking a look at today. In section 1, you have the General Assembly's approval expressly in that sectional provision. And the reflection that the voters approved this on March 7th, 2023. And to save us all that 15 seconds of introduction for the next three, section 1 is the same in each one of the bills that you'll be taking a look at this afternoon. Section 2 in the Burlington Charter amends section 2 is the description of the election boundaries. As you noted, there is a high level of specificity throughout the amendments to this section. And the best way to do a detailed walkthrough, if you would like to do that at some point, is probably to actually put the maps up on the screen at some point and go through and make sure that the statutory description matches the drawn lines, similar to what this committee did with redistricting last session.
Hopefully that won't be traumatic for anyone. I love all the mapping.
You don't want to bring me back to any trauma you experienced.
Especially on the Burlington charters. Moving forward, yes.
So without reading through line by line the line descriptions for each of the wards, I'll note that they have set them out in meticulous detail. You should review the maps and that this takes effect on passage. And that's the only amendment presented in H506 is the redrawing of the ward lines within the city.
Sounds like next step will be a little session looking at the maps of the ward boundaries in Burlington. Any questions on 506 before we move on? All right, thank you very much. So now we'll turn to H507, which is amendments related to polling place provisions.
Yes, so moving on, to H507. Do you need me to reintroduce myself every time? Okay, because Bob will be here a long time.
A package deal today.
Okay, so, and as the Legislative Council said, these were all passed on March 2023 town meeting. I failed to say that in my beginning as well. So I will not say that each time. So H507 is another, I consider, technical election related charter change. This one is related to where we place our polling locations within the city. So currently our charter requires that all polling locations be located within the boundaries of each city ward. So we have 8 wards right now, 8 polling locations. This has created a number of challenges over the years. When we redistrict, it creates a significant challenge when drawing those lines we just talked about in the last charter to make sure that there is a usable space within each ward for a polling location. An example is Edmonds Middle School, which sits right on Main Street as you come into Burlington. That sits right on the edge of Ward 6. So every time we redraw the lines, and we have to often in that area of the city because you pass University of Vermont, that is a growing area of our city often. it really makes it quite challenging to figure out how to redraw Ward 6's lines in order to still maintain a usable polling location. Some other polling sites are frankly inappropriate or cumbersome. Ward 8, which is a new ward we created about 10 years ago because there was such growth in the central part of the city, is sort of like right behind City Market and going up the hill a little bit and kind of a high concentrated area of a lot of college residents. Ward 8 now uses the library, and that is a tricky place to use with the increase of traffic when the library is trying to be open, and it's not really well suited for the number of people coming in to vote in person. So that one has been a tricky one since that ward was created. Over in Ward 4, which is part of my legislative district, it gets a little bit more awkward because we use an unused school that's part of the Catholic Church in Ward 4 because there is no other public space we could use within the boundaries of Ward 4, which is extra tricky because literally across the street, North Avenue, is our public rec center, the Miller Center, which is where Ward 7 votes, and there'll be ample space to very distinct locations for people to vote, but we are precluded from doing that based on our current charter. And there's another space in Ward 4 Ward 1 that also uses the Catholic school. And as folks, voter comfort around church and state division, et cetera, it gets very tricky as we try to navigate that when people are coming to vote. So this charter would require polls to be within the ward unless a more accessible facility is available outside the ward and is in a close proximity to the residents of the ward where that poll is not technically located. So it's a pretty straightforward one. It will allow us some flexibility, but I want to emphasize that it still says that polls will be required to be within the ward unless there is a more appropriate, accessible location that makes more sense, essentially. I want to point you again to the Ward 4-7 example, like literally going across the street would not be a big hindrance. Actually, many folks have asked us why we're not doing that already, at least when I'm standing outside the polls. So that is H507. The vote count here, total votes cast on this question was 9,968. 7,623 voted yes. That's a 76.5% margin. And 2,345 voted no. That is a 23.5% response.
Any questions for Representative Mulvaney-Stanek? Seems pretty straightforward. And I believe Ms. Montgomery, you were going to be available to testify on this for the city staff. Would you introduce yourself for the record?
Hi, I'm Sarah Montgomery, the Assistant City Clerk of Burlington. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks. I think we had just wanted to make sure that as we take a look at this bill and we are kind of trying to get a sense of each of these today and whether these are things that are straightforward, we can move quickly, or whether we need to take a lot of testimony. It sounds like this was a pretty popular provision, and that there are some obvious logistical concerns with the limitations on polling places right now. But is there anything to Representative Mulvaney-Stanek's testimony that you think is useful for us to know as we look at this?
I don't think there's anything to add. That pretty much covers some of the challenges, specifically looking at the redistricting that's being proposed. It does move Edmonds back into Ward 8. So 2 of our polling places are going to be in that same ward as it currently stands. So just kind of the opportunity to have some flexibility around that would be helpful.
Does anybody have any questions? Are you on deck for this one? Ashley, do you want to come and give us the Ledge Council overview? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Angel, as you all know, law clerk for Legislative Council. I'm here to report on H507. As you heard, this bill proposes to amend the charter of the city of Burlington to provide procedures for designating the location of polling places within the city. As covered touched on before in the prior charter, section 1 is just the same amendment approval that you all have been charters. As the representative here referred to, this was approved on March 7th, 2023. That being said, I'm moving on to section 2, the amendment to Title 24 Appendix CSA in Chapter 3, which is the Charter of the City of Burlington. So I wanted to provide some general information on some current authority under Title 17 of the Vermont statutes as they apply to polling places. The Board of Civil Authority, and I also wanted to speak about the current charter provision governing polling locations in Burlington. So under Title 17, the first statute that I'm referring to is Section 2502. In Vermont, generally 30 days prior to a local primary or general election, town clerk shall submit to the Secretary of State a list of polling places within the municipality that will be used in the election. And the municipality may change the location of said polling place less than 30 days prior to the election, only in emergency situations. These changes must be reported within 24 hours. This is similar to what Burlington has proposed in their charter and that the voters approved of. So that's how that relates. I wanted to next talk about the Board of Civil Authority. That's in section 2451 of Title 17. So the Board of Civil Authority has the charge of the conduct of elections within the political subdivision for which it's elected. And that board consists of a town clerk, select board members, and justices residing in a town. So that board may issue guidance for elections officials, and that assists officials in conducting elections within the political subdivision. So that would help with the new polling location determinations. Lastly, I wanted to talk about current Burlington charter provision.
Can I just ask one quick question about what you just said? So general law says it's the Board of Civil Authority that decides on those election details, but in this charter language, it's the city council that sets the locations, right?
City council, yes.
Not the whole Board of Civil Authority, specifically the city council in consultation with the clerk.
Right. So, Tucker, I had a question regarding the Board of Civil Authority and the town council, excuse me, and the new charter.
So with the polling places charter, it makes in 507, it says that the city council in consultation with the clerk's office and ward clerks, et cetera, is going to have that authority. General law is the Board of Civil Authority, right?
Yes, that is correct, and that's reiterated in a few other municipal charters that I can send to you. I believe the town of Hardwick is the only municipality that requires the DCA to specifically get a recommendation from their legislative body, which is an odd construct because the legislative body is also part of the Board of Civil Authority.
Okay. All right.
Currently, the Burlington Charter is titled Where Elections Are Held and Early Voter Absentee Ballots. And the current charter does not have specifics regarding all the polling places that the state one does. And this bill changes this section, which is section 19 under section 2, by striking the old language where elections held and early voter absentee ballots and adds the designation of polling places. And then the section further strikes the original language from the charter within that provision. And as the representative here referenced, the new language requires city council in consultation with the city clerk's office, ward clerks, and inspectors of election to determine the number and location of polling places at least 30 days prior to a local primary or general election. And it also goes over the polling places, locations in each ward, and the accessible facilities that the representative here referred to. And it also requires that if there are more than one polling place located in the same building, that each be separate and distinct from the other. In section 3, as you're all familiar with, is the effective date, which is effective on passage for this particular charter provision.
And maybe this is a good question for Ms. Montgomery. Currently, it looks like the current language is silent on who's making the decision about polling places, if I'm reading this right. And so it would be the Board of Civil Authority.
Yeah, that's my understanding on how it currently works.
Was there a specific conversation about why the city council, in consultation with the other elections officials, as opposed to just having the Board of Civil Authority be the body to the bigger body to meet?
I'm not aware of that conversation, but I would definitely defer to our attorney's office on that language.
And that would really be my only question here.
Sticks in my head, am I? Board of Civil Authority and City Council are just three hats.
It's the council and the justices of the peace and the elections officials, so it's a bigger.
Not in Burlington, though, Chair McCarthy. It's the same entity. I used to serve on the city council in Burlington, and we would adjourn and then reconvene as the Board of Civil Authority. So they're not involved, at least in Burlington. So it's a little bit different in our structure.
So the justices of the peace are defined out of the Board of Civil Authority elsewhere in the charter.
In Burlington, I mean, they've never attended a Burlington, Board of Civil Authority when I was a city councilor for 3 years. So we always switched and we were the entity for all recounts, et cetera. I'm seeing a nod, at least from Meg. I don't know if Sarah's nodding along too, but I'm sure Tucker might be looking it up, but it is a very different structure. Actually, I learned that when I moved to Winooski for a couple of years, because that is different in other towns. And I was on the Board of Civil Authority when I was a JP in Winooski. Very different. So
that's the default.
We never did.
So maybe Ms. Tuttle, do you have any, could you enlighten us at all on this particular issue, or are you just confirming that that's been the experience, it's just the city council?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with what Rep. Mulvaney Stanek has said. Our city council convenes as our Board of Civil Authorities. And I know in particular that when the Board of Civil Authorities was asked to review the redistricting efforts of the legislature, that was the body that did it. And we did that on the same night that we talked about local redistricting efforts as well.
Any other questions on 507? Thanks, everybody. Representative Mulvaney Stanek. The third one here is H508, which has to do with ranked choice voting provisions. We're getting to be expert at ranked choice voting policy here.
this will not be too far afield from what you've been talking about in other election levels. So yes, 508 is a second ranked choice voting related question that's been put to the city voters in Burlington. The first was back in March of 2021 in order to making ranked choice voting a method of voting for city council, only city council at that point. The legislature passed that charter in 2022 and Burlington implemented ranked choice voting in 2 different city council races since then. Both were successful. One was a special election held in December of 2022. The second was just last March 2023. Both of those races had 3 candidates, so ranked choice voting did come into play, but it was not applied because the actual winners in both of those races received a majority. So it was not, they didn't need to kind of invoke, if you will, or use the ranked choice voting process. However, the clerk's office still ran ranked choice voting tabulator, and it worked well. And voters reported that it was easy to understand. In I'm not sure which election, but one of those elections, a nonpartisan national organization called the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, which works in various states around the country, maybe you've actually interfaced with them already, I'm not sure, observed one of those elections for issues on the back end because they do a lot of the back end tabulator and software work. And they saw no issues and did not report any issues in those 2 ranked choice voting elections that Burlington has since had. So the vote for this particular charter, when I'll tell you the vote count at the end, because I feel like it's a nice dramatic way to end. But anyway, the vote count in 2023 was only within a 1% difference from where voters were 2 years ago, which shows that voters have a consistent opinion on this, that we've gone through it twice in different parts of the city. And and voters are still consistently supportive of it. This charter change would add ranked choice voting for the position of mayor, school commissioners, and election official positions like ward clerk in the sense of Burlington. This would cover almost all of our locally elected roles except for justice of the peace. And I did ask about that, and I think it's the answer I sort of got from the chair of our charter change committee, Councilor Bergman, was there's 12, 15, however many, there's many justices of the peace, and that's a system that at least at this point, the city council did not want to go all the way to that level. So this would again just be for mayor, school commissioners, and election officials like ward clerk. Ranked choice voting, as we've heard probably in many other conversations so far, is truly good for voters and democracy. It helps to strengthen the voter's voice in the voting process. Because you can finally vote how you truly want to vote and not strategically or at all, or, really kind of just put your vote forward, which includes not ranking anyone at all, simply voting one person, and that is it. And that is totally a valid way to still vote under ranked choice voting. I want to note that Burlington voters have a big mayoral election coming up in March of 2024. And much like the other two charters I just mentioned around polling locations and the actual lines for the wards and districts, it'd be really helpful to the city to be able to act on these, have the legislature act on these three charters so that we can be well prepared ahead of that election cycle and make sure our clerks are ready, our local election workers are ready. The mayor is elected on a 3-year term, so this is our pretty big race. More people turn out on these races than any of our other local elections, and it would be great to help Burlington be ready for that for March 2024. That is all I have on this one.
So I have a lot of questions that I think if we come back to this might be more appropriate, but I wanted to give Ms. Montgomery an opportunity to maybe just give us a preview of coming attractions. So it sounds like things went pretty smoothly with the city council ward elections, and I'm wondering if there's been a conversation in the clerk's office about what it will take in terms of timeline and logistics to make sure you're ready for having, if there needs to be an IRB calculation for a multi-precinct race like mayor, for instance, if you feel ready to do that as early as the March 24 election, assuming we were able to pass this legislative session.
Yeah, thank you. We did do this, as was mentioned, for 2 previous elections for a total of 6 races. In March, 4 of those races were for district seats for councilors, so they were already encompassing 2 different wards. So that is when the centralized tabulation would come into play, similar to a mayor's race. So I think we already have the policies and procedures in place to handle. So logistically, we're well prepared to implement this already. It would just be a matter of voter education in this aspect.
And so in order to accomplish that, did you bring the ballots and run them through a centralized tabulator, or did you take tabulated results, the data, and aggregate that to perform the calculation?
Yeah, we actually didn't need to do it in March because each candidate won with a 50% majority. But how the process works is we just take the memory cards from the tabulators. So it's the data that's collected at each polling place, and we're centralizing that with the software at City Hall.
Any other questions for Representative Mulvaney-Stanek or Ms. Montgomery?
Mr. Chair, I was very dramatic and did not give you the vote count on this one. I don't want you to lose.
I
share it. All right, I try to be. I am that lab partner who gets the job fully done. So here, this one on this charter change question, the vote count. We had more folks vote on this one, so the total vote count was 10,403. Voting yes, 6,702 for a margin of percentage of 64.4%, and 3,701 voted no for 35.6%. That was the vote outcome on this one.
Big vote.
And within what I know, you're welcome. I'm so glad I can leave on the edge of the street. Again, I want to emphasize that's within 1% of when they were asked that same question for a different race 2 years ago.
The last question I had was, we spent a lot of time talking about the calculation methods, and it's my understanding that when we passed the earlier provision that was just for city council races, that we left it up to the city of Burlington to decide whether you were going to use Hare method or Condorcet or some other method of actually doing the instant runoff calculation. And I'm wondering, I know that there was a process, but did the city have a robust public conversation about that? And was there a choice made about that that's kind of now?
Yes, they went with the HARE method, which is the method that's used far and wide throughout the country. And it is the best used and best sort of proven process, if you will. And they did, and I mean, Sarah will have to speak to the robust city process because as a legislator, I don't engage on quite that level of detail of city government. But it went through the whole ordinance process and review, and where the city really again landed with they wanted to use a system that was well used with other municipalities and in some cases states, which is the HARE method.
That answers my question, but Ms. Montgomery, if you have further comment on the process, I'd love to just understand how that decision was arrived.
Sure. So I did go through our ordinance committee to set additional rules in order for us to implement it. I think there were 2 to 3 ordinance committee meetings, and then it was pushed back to the full city council for approval. So it was warned at several public meetings and discussed.
Well, thank you. I think we should turn to legislative council. And Tucker, are you going to take this one?
All right, good afternoon again. Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. H508, the third Burlington Charter you're taking a look at, proposes to amend the city's ranked choice voting provision within their city charter. As you mentioned earlier, just last year, this was amended to allow for ranked choice voting in city council elections by ward. This proposes in section 2 to go back to that section and amend it so that mayor, school commissioners, and ward election officers would also be elected by RCV. What is left out of the bill as introduced is the subdivisions that follow that subsection B, which describe the guidelines that must be followed for this process. Wanted to make sure that you know them at least during this initial walkthrough. First, the ballot that is used shall give the voters the option of ranking candidates in order of preference. Second, if the candidate receives a majority over 50% of first preferences, that candidate is elected. If no candidate receives a majority of first preferences, an instant runoff tabulation shall be performed by the presiding election officer. And then finally, and this is what this committee did, added a 4th subdivision, which was mediated between the city and the House Government Operations Committee, to allow the city the discretion to adopt ordinances consistent with this subsection to implement these standards. And there is an ordinance that was adopted, and for the most part, it re-enumerates subdivisions 1 through 3 from this statutory provision. Maybe something that the committee wants to review at some point to determine whether that provides a standard based on your very in-depth research over the last few weeks into ranked choice voting. It is whether it's a standard recognizable to the committee at this point.
Any questions for Tucker? At this point, the H508 as presented is just taking what we already did and by having it apply to the mayoral, school commissioner, and board election officers. So it's just adding more offices that are under the hierarchy of choice voting. Okay. Well, thank you very much. All right.
Say if you want. Maybe you're getting your steps in. I don't know. Okay.
And last up on our tour of these new Burlington Charter amendments is H509, and this is a voter qualification provisions to represent Albany Stink.
H509, which is the last one I have for you all today, will actually be quite familiar, and Burlington is not the first one to do this one. So just want to emphasize that one for the record. We would be maybe the third. So this would be to allow all illegal residents of Burlington who do not have full U.S. citizenship, but who live, work, pay taxes, go to school, etc., and our members of our community to allow them to vote in our local elections. So these community members are impacted by local policy decisions in the same way that residents who are U.S. citizens are. They send their kids to school, they pay taxes, they've lived there for many years in many cases. But extending these voting rights to this part of our population and our community is a critical way for all of Burlington residents to participate and have their voices heard in our local democracy and the outcome of our policy decisions, which we have many. So I asked this question of our chair of our charter committee. I was just curious if they looked at the number of people this would impact in Burlington. And our community economic development office, which is CEDO in the city of Burlington, still has a great page up that talks about the voter education about this question. So if you're curious, you can look on CEDO's website, on the city website. But they said, according to 2020 American Community Survey, which is an organization, in a 5-year data review of the city of Burlington, 5.5% of the city's population are not U.S. citizens currently. So 5.5%, which is large considering how big Burlington is. And additionally, 5.1% of the city's population has been through the naturalization process, but not fully to U.S. citizenship. So and really, this could be thousands of community members impacted in Burlington with this particular charter change. So legal residents would gain the right to vote in elections related to mayor, city council, school board commissioners or school board members, city election officers, those ward clerks I mentioned prior, and any ballot item pertaining to the city of Burlington. So when we have questions, referendums, advisory questions, et cetera, that relate to the city of Burlington. It would also allow legal residents to be able to run for any of these offices once they were registered to vote. The all resident voting charter language was purposely designed to be very similar to Winooski's all resident voting, which last biennium, the legislature approved and moved that charter forward for the city of Winooski. And just to also name, Montpelier also had a similar all resident voting, but that only applied to municipal elections, not school board. This is purposely written more like Winooski's, which was school board and their city council. And so while there's small differences, which if you have technical questions on, I'm going to phone a friend on, it's very similar. And the intention was to be as close to Winooski's language as possible. They held several hearings on this. And actually, interestingly enough, the charter change chair noted to me that when they heard from residents about this new voting model or new voting eligibility, I should say, a lot of folks who don't currently have the right to vote, who are legal residents and not citizens, said that they actually would see this as helping them to understand the value of working towards citizenship, because they would have a deeper, more firsthand experience and appreciation of democracy, and would actually incentivize people to really move all the way through that process to become full U.S. Citizens. With that is what I have in 509. Oh, and the vote count. Thank you for that dramatic look. So the vote count is total votes on this one. Again, it was a popular question. 10,509 votes total. 7,143 voted yes, which is 67.97% of the vote. And then 3,366 voted no. That is about 32%.
Representative Chase.
From some of the other efforts we've heard about the kind of the splash effect, like people potentially voting for things that might impact other towns. Burlington, I think, is big enough so everything would be kind of self-contained. Are there any positions that might be on that list that would have the impact of affecting finances or whatever for other towns outside of the Burlington city limits?
Sure, that question came up when the other charters were considered last biennium. And much like Winooski, we're our own self-contained school district. We're our own self-contained city. So we don't have any, I guess the question would be, and this would be a phone a friend moment, because we do occasionally vote on, I guess, CSWD's budget, which is the Chittenden County Solid Waste. I'm just trying to think as a voter what other things would be on that ballot, but I don't know how that would apply, and I'd have to phone a friend on terms of that level of it. That'd be a district involving the whole county. So,
Thanks.
So I'm gonna invite Tucker to come up because he is desperately desired upstairs in another committee, and I just wanted to give an opportunity to do a quick breeze through what's in here and ask a couple of quick questions, and then we'll let you go up to Ways and Means.
I am very popular.
Yes.
It is accurate to state that H 509 borrows very heavily from the two existing charter provisions that allow non-citizens who are residents of municipalities to vote in municipal elections. That would be the City of Winooski Charter and the City of Montpelier Charter. As the representative accurately noted, the Burlington proposal that you have in front of you is slightly different, close to Winooski, close to Montpelier. The reason Montpelier is a little different is that there's a shared school district, so it is only municipal elections. This proposes to amend Section 8 and add a new Section 8A to the city's charter. In Section 8, this is a conforming change to allow for the all resident voting to take place and not be in conflict with the existing charter provisions. It provides that the legal voter may cast a ballot for local officers and local public questions specific to a ward or city district only if that voter resides in the ward or city district at the time the ballot is cast. Pretty straightforward. That is rewritten and removes a reference to citizen that exists in the current charter. Section 8A is added to describe the requirements for legal resident voters who are not citizens. As you are aware, under both the general law and Title 17 and the constitutional provisions for statewide offices, the requirements to be a voter are 18 years of age, U.S. citizen, in the case of municipal elections, residing in the municipality and having taken the voter's oath. You have worked on a charter already this session that expands voting qualifications within those parameters with the Brattleboro Charter, where you amended the charter to allow for purposes of town elections 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, provided they meet the other qualifications. Subsection A sets aside those general law requirements. It describes the following as legal resident voters: those who are legal residents of the United States, not less than 18 years of age, having taken the voter's oath, resides in the city of Burlington as residency is defined in 17 VSA section 2122, and has registered to vote with the Board of Registration of Voters. Is used in the section, legal resident of the United States, means any non-citizen who resides on a permanent or indefinite basis in compliance with federal immigration laws. This is the same definition that is used in the Winooski and Montpelier charter provisions. Burlington added a provision here in subsection C that states that the section does not change a non-citizen's ability to vote in state or federal elections. Just making sure, belts and suspenders, that this would not be interpreted to affect any other elections besides those described in the Burlington charter. In subsection D, a legal resident voter who is not a citizen may cast a ballot only for local officers and local public questions specific to a ward or city district. The chief administrative officer is charged in subsection E with developing all necessary forms and procedures for implementation of this section of the charter. That is very similar to the Winooski and Montpelier charters, where the clerk of those respective cities is charged with this duty. I will note that you have a brand new, still shiny Vermont Supreme Court case, Ferry v. City of Montpelier, which expressly states that Section 42 of the Vermont Constitution does not apply to local elections, and that it is within your plenary authority, since you are able to create, destroy, and alter municipalities at will, to design the qualifications for local elections. I wanted to make sure to note that and to give you the opportunity to ask in the future for a discussion of that decision, because there was, in the limited debate on the floor about the Brattleboro Charter, a reference to Section 42 of the Vermont Constitution. It was part of a point of inquiry about that charter, and the Vermont Supreme Court has resolved that question very squarely in the Ferry v. Montpelier decision. I'd be happy to go through it with you, mostly because it seems like maybe they borrowed a lot from some legislative council memos over the last 4 years. The constitutionality of these proposals.
I think that, was that legislative council throwing a little shade over the clerks across the way?
Yes. A moment to applaud for the very hard work that Betsy Ann Rask did early on with the constitutional analysis around the Montpelier Charter.
I would like to go through that.
I think it would be really good, especially since most of the members of this Government Operations Committee have not had this discussion. I'm particularly interested in visiting some of the historical contexts where it used to be that legal residents could participate in local elections. And around the time of World War I, we heard last biennium that there was this effort to only have United States citizens vote. So it would be interesting to go back down memory lane as we pick this back up. I guess the key pieces here that I was interested in for the purposes of understanding how complex our testimony would need to be on this is that it's very similar to those two others. And that in the Winooski similarity, the school district piece, it's that Burlington has its own school district that is
Contiguous.
yes, the word I was looking for, thank you. Any other quick questions for Tucker before we let him go upstairs? Representative Hooper.
The VOTEC is not exclusive to Burlington. How is that funded?
It's not, but it's CTEs are based on the money travels with the student from the district. So every town does their own school budget. And then Burlington kids get the Burlington tuition, go to Burlington Technical Center. And if Colchester kid came, it's the Colchester school budget by tuition. We talk about this a bit in commerce, so that,
Is that
I mean-
defined, you know? Never mind.
I did want to note, Representative brought up the multi-municipal member districts that include the city of Burlington. By statute, those districts are supposed to be running their own elections. It's usually a favor to those districts that municipalities will include their questions on the municipal ballot. And there's been a lot of debate and intrigue about that in the past. But at least for the city of Burlington, if this were to move forward, the chief administrative officer, and probably the clerk, would have to figure out a way to have those district questions on a separately printed ballot that could be presented to the city voters. Or just tell the district to run its own election.
At the risk of me losing the favor of Chair Kornheiser, I'm going to let Tucker go. We'll have you back if we pick up this conversation. Thank you so much. That would be a good question, I think, for Ms. Montgomery, if she's still online with us, potentially. And I could get an answer in future testimony, but it'd be interesting to know if the clerk's office, as this charter language was discussed, had conversations with any of the multi-member municipalities like the solid waste district about how the eligibility or, would you have to have a separate ballot or do you already have a separate ballot for those questions?
This is something that CEDO took on more fully, but I can speak to the past election that we did have. In solid waste, they were on a separate ballot already because they didn't have the authority for to be auto mailed to all of our voters. But I think the thought would be that if there were questions or candidates that didn't apply to just Burlington, they would be printed on separate ballots.
Any other questions at this point? All right. Well, that was a very efficient initial introduction to these four bills. Thank you, Representative Mulvaney Stanek. I think we will probably spend a little more time on these, but it's my impression that we should be able to do our work and at least move these on the House side fairly quickly, unless we run into a question that I didn't see today, but these all look fairly straightforward. Thanks.
Great. Well, the Queen City appreciates it. Thank you very much.
So committee, I would say, why don't we give ourselves 5 minutes, because I think our guest is not with us yet.